I hope this finds all of you healthy and doing well. This is the lecture for Chapter 4, Alcohol Use Disorders and Loosening the Grip. And we're going to be talking about the disease concept of alcohol use disorders, or alcoholism, or alcohol addiction, or however you want to call it. There are, as you probably figured out by now, there's some pushes by people. There's a group of folks in recovery who want to get away from terms like drug abuse, alcohol abuse, and I don't take issue with them on that. And in the DSM-5, we've kind of lost that term abuse, and I want to talk about that a little bit tonight. And an adopted harmful use, which is probably a better description. But in any case, a problem with communication, a problem with language, is we use terms and we think people understand them. We think that they understand them the way that we ourselves understand them, that I'm thinking about it one way or another way, and that when I use language, that I'm conveying that thought to them. And actually, it's pretty darn difficult to convey one's thoughts completely to another person and get them to understand it the same way, of course, that we do. So one of the things that's happened over time in the treatment field is there's been an attempt to kind of universalize these concepts and to universalize the terms and the language that we use. It makes communication clearer, is helpful to us in that regard if we both know what we're talking about when we use a term such as alcohol abuse or substance use disorder or alcoholic. So we're going to talk about that tonight. And without further ado, I will share my screen and away we'll go. And alcohol use disorders, that's what we're calling it this week. Oh, what? Yeah, well, good question. What constitutes an alcohol use disorder? For LCDCs, the answer's in the DSM-5. And the DSM-5 is a very important book for us. It's been through a number of incarnations over time. The first DSM was written in 1952, or was published in 1952, and it contained some diagnoses that we no longer have. For instance, in both this DSM and this DSM, homosexuality was a diagnosable illness. You could diagnose people as being gay and send them away for psychiatric treatment and what have you. And a lot of closeted homosexuals who were very unhappy with themselves and their lives submitted to treatments to make them straight. And I don't think such a treatment exists now, nor will it ever, for people who are gay. It just doesn't work that way. But anyway, and it doesn't matter what what terminologies that you put on various disorders. If it's a disorder, it remains, no matter what you call it. What you call it is entirely up to you. But when we're looking for that, when we're establishing criteria and we're putting a name on a disorder, or we're putting a name, attaching a name to a syndrome, a personality disorder, whatever it is, we're being clear on what we mean when we use that term, And to some degree, if it's being a diagnosis of an illness, it tends to destigmatize that term, and that's really important. Alcohol use disorder is a problematic pattern of alcohol use leading to significant impairment or distress, as evidenced by 2 of the following symptoms occurring within a 12-month period. Now, this is from the DSM-5. Alcohol is often taken in larger amounts or over a longer period than was intended. Okay, I got that one. 2, there's a persistent desire to or unsuccessful efforts to cut down or control alcohol use. Okay, I got that one. 3, a great deal of time is spent in activities necessary to obtain alcohol, use alcohol, or recover from its effects. Yep, I got that one. 4, craving or a strong desire or urge to use alcohol. Yep, got that one too. Recurrent alcohol use resulting in a failure to fulfill major role obligations at school, home, or work. Yep, got that one. And there's more. Continued alcohol use despite having persistent or recurring social or interpersonal problems caused by or exacerbated by alcohol's use, made worse. Yep, got that one. So far, I'm 6 for 6. 7, important social, occupational, or recreational activities are given up or reduced because of alcohol use. Yepers. Recurrent alcohol use in situations which is physically hazardous. Oh, heck yeah, got that one. Alcohol use is continued even when it is known that physical or psychological problems are caused by or aggravated by continued use. Got that one too. Tolerance is defined by either a need for markedly increased amounts of alcohol to achieve intoxication or desired effect, or by B, markedly diminished effect with continued use of the same amount of alcohol. Got that one. And 11, withdrawal is evidenced by either the characteristic withdrawal syndrome for alcohol or the use of alcohol or a closely related substance, such as benzodiazepine, to relieve or avoid withdrawal symptoms. And guess what? I got that one too. I'm 11 for 11. And this is occurring within a 12-month period. And in that 12-month period, when I quit using back in 1982, I was batting 1,000. Woohoo! Nice to be good at something, huh? Diagnostic criteria, the things we just looked at, clinically define a substance use disorder. They also identify substance abuse clients, like this young man sitting here with his shots in front of him. Okay, so what's the difference between someone with a substance abuse disorder, an alcoholic, and a drunk? Old AA joke. Drunks don't have to go to meetings. Alcoholic is a lay term, and it's awfully subjective. And if I say alcoholic to you, if we're talking in terms of alcoholism, and I'm talking about an alcoholic, what pops into your head? Or more likely, who pops into your head? I know for me, as a family member, it's my uncle, Buford. He very quietly, and I've mentioned this in some other classes before, drank himself to death back on his sofa in the 5th Ward in Houston around 1970-ish, somewhere in there, 1971 or 72, early 70s. And he's the guy that pops into my head when I think of an alcoholic. And I've encountered lots of them in my time, but he's the one that pops into my head. And for some family members, it's me, that guy, this person. Someone asked me one time when I taught this class, 25 years ago, she wanted to know what's the profile of a typical alcoholic, until I turned my head and said, this is the profile of a typical alcoholic. which it is, by the way. Stereotypes, and we've got plenty of them with alcoholics out there, contain a grain of truth, but they don't tell the whole story. If you're thinking about an alcoholic as being the guy who's living on the streets and sleeping in doorways, and wiping your car window off with a squeegee to try to get some shekels to buy some booze with, that is an alcoholic, but it is not the alcoholic. And when we look at stereotypical drunks like the little tramp here, Charlie Chaplin, and his drinking companion, or Foster Brooks, or Dean Martin, or any of these guys that made a living playing drunks, and the portrayal of drunks for comic effect. Otis of Mayberry, that used to get locked up in Andy Griffith's jail all the time. Drunks are funny, right? Actually, they do some funny stuff, but there's nothing funny about alcoholism. The early definitions of alcoholism, and this is from your book, Loosening the Grip, talks about AA originally saying this is a disease. It's an obsession of the mind plus an allergy of the body. And what it is an obsessive compulsive disorder, the way they describe it. But it follows a disease syndrome, and that after you cross a certain point, after you reach a certain point in your drinking career, according to Bill W. and the good old timers, that when you cross that line, on this side of the line, you could stop drinking if you wanted to. And that if you had sufficient reason to stop drinking, you're not damaged to the point that you can't do that. But that once you cross that line, once you take that one drink too many, that one toke over the line, if you will, and you step over it, then that formula changes. Whereas when you could stop drinking, you didn't want to, and now you want to, but you can't because you've fallen into a disease process. E.M. Jelinek, whom we'll be discussing a little later on, said that anyone who uses alcoholic beverages to the extent that they cause damage to the individual, to the society, or to both suffers from alcoholism. The World Health Organization, this is, boy, what a mouthful, huh? Any form of drinking which in extent goes beyond the tradition and the customary dietary use or the ordinary compliance with social drinking customs of the community concerned, irrespective of ideological factors leading to such behavior, and irrespective also to the extent to which ideological factors are dependent upon heredity, constitution, or acquired physiological and metabolic influences. Boy, that sends you scrambling for your Funkin' Wagnalls to figure out, to decode what the hell they're saying, right? Basically, they're saying if you drink more than is normal for your society, and regardless of the factors that lead to such behaviors. And etiology, by the way, is looking at disease factors. So regardless of those factors leading to it, and irrespective to the extent which these factors are dependent upon heredity, constitution, acquired physiological and metabolic influences, whether you inherited your tendency to drink too much or whether you drank yourself into a position where you drink too much, it's irrespective of that. Oh, by the way, some people would say irregardless, but irregardless means regardless of regardless. It's a double negative. It doesn't make sense, so don't say that. Irrespective is a good word, though. Say what? Yeah, that's what I said. Oh, yes, there's more. American Psychiatric Association, 1968, said alcoholism. This category is for patients whose alcohol intake is great enough to damage their physical health or their personal or social functioning, or when it's become a prerequisite to normal functioning. Now that right there, that, my dears, is saying a mouthful when it's become a prerequisite to normal functioning. There was, I would like to credit it, but I can't think of who it was who did it. There was a prevention effort some years ago that had a slogan, "Stop the Madness." That was their slogan, and they were talking about drug use. And I was kind of laughing about that with a friend of mine. And again, I said, nothing really funny about drug use, but I think it was kind of funny that they picked that slogan. Every drug addict on planet Earth, when he's getting his fix, scoring his dope, drinking his booze, whatever it is that he's doing, is trying to stop the madness, because that is the normal function. I don't feel right when I don't have something in me. I don't feel right when I don't have something to drink. And if I don't have the proper amount in there too, I don't feel right. It's a really strange situation. If you got to get, when you get up in the morning, have a beer or two before you shave so that you don't cut your throat, then you have met this categorical definition. In 1977, the American Medical Association, the AMA, from the Manual on Alcoholism, says that alcoholism is an illness characterized by significant impairment that is directly associated with persistent and excessive use of alcohol. Impairment may involve physiological, psychological, or social dysfunction. Any of those. In 1993, the American Society of Addiction Medicine came up with the definition: alcoholism is a primary chronic disease with a genetic, psychological, and environmental factors influencing its development and manifestations, the way it shows on the individual and the way it presents itself in the world. The disease is often progressive and fatal. It is characterized by continuous or periodic impairment, impaired control over drinking. That's loss of control, by the way. Preoccupation with the drug alcohol, and that's obsession. Use of alcohol despite adverse consequences, compulsion, and distortions in thinking, most notably denial. Sounding like something Alcoholics Anonymous tried to tell people, didn't it? And so things got a little circular there. And that is sort of what the big book in AA have been saying since their inception. But here was me when I first sobered up. And I had a real problem with the disease concept, kiddos. I have to admit that. And this is my thinking. Wait a minute. You have to go to the store, buy it, you have to open it, you have to drink it. How's that an illness? It's not, no one's sitting on your chest and making you do this or pulling a gun on you and say, drink it or I'll blow your brains out, right? How is that an illness? Well, that's a good question. We're going to talk about that. It's a disease because it's primary. Because it's a disease in itself. You're not an alcoholic because you chose to drink too much. That's not what makes you an alcoholic. Plenty of people choose to drink too much and they're not alcoholic. And they stop it when they want to and they do it when they want to. and you know that if they start having problems with it, the chances are pretty good that they're going to moderate that themselves. They're going to back off on it till they're consuming an amount that's not a problem. But for an alcoholic, loss of normal choice is part of the illness. And someone who has alcohol use disorder, they can't predict how much they're going to drink once they start. The ability to regulate is pretty well lost in that. Drinking more than you intended to drink on occasion is not something that really makes you an alcoholic, but it becomes a regular way of life for someone who is an alcoholic, for someone who does have this disorder. I stop after work. I'm just going to have a couple of beers with my buddies, and then at 2 o'clock in the morning, they're pouring me out the door, and I don't know what hit me. I don't know how that happened. I drank more than I intended to. It's chronic. Once you have it, it's forever. I know of nothing that cures this illness. There is, to my knowledge, absolutely no cure for this. I have a religious friend who said that when he got saved, God delivered him from his alcoholism. And bless his heart, I'm not going to argue with him about that. But chances are pretty good that if he decides that God delivered him to the point where he can go back and drink again, then it's going to be a disaster, because his body is not going to forget what alcohol is, and his body is not going to respond differently than it ever has to that, putting that drug in them. I think it would be, and I hope he never finds out. So, like I said, more power to him. Alcoholism is progressive. It worsens over time. It gets worse whether you're drinking or not. And this is something that's really bizarre. You start drinking, you drink for 10 years, it wasn't a good idea to have this career. You decide, well, that sucks, I'm going to stop drinking and get my life in order, and you do, and you stay sober for 10 years. And then you finally get to retirement and you say, okay, well, now I'm going to, go and retire and draw my pension, and everything will be hunky-dory, and I think I'll have a drink every once in a while now because I don't have a job to lose, the kids are raised, everything's cool. And the individual who starts drinking like this again is very soon in terrible shape. It's almost as if that period of 10 years of sobriety didn't even occur. And I know I repeat myself sometimes because I'm, especially now when I'm recording these things, and man, it's this non-synchronous time has got me in a strange place, where I'm not really in a classroom with you. But it worsens over time. An acquaintance of mine, Sonny, would say that, while I'm in here in the meetings and I'm telling you all my story and you're telling me yours and we're hanging out and we're sharing our experience, strength, and hope and everything, he said, that's all cool, but where I better have a program is when I walk out that door, because when I walk out that door, I will discover that my disease has been in the parking lot doing push-ups and waiting on my ass, and I better be ready for it when it comes out there. It gets worse over time. It marches on. Time of sobriety does not reset the clock for you. It does not make it okay to go back and pick up where you left off, because you don't. You pick up where you would have been if you hadn't stopped. Weird. It's a disease because it's fatal both directly and indirectly. There are people who die of their addictions. As I'm talking to you today, I am the last surviving member of my family of origin. My father was a drinker, but it was his cigarette addiction that killed him. My mother, too, she wasn't a drinker, but her tobacco use got her. All three of my little brothers were drinkers, druggers, and tobacco users, and they all three died primarily of, well, two of them primarily of their nicotine addictions. Although, as we'll see a little later on, alcohol complicates that too. People who drown because they're doing stupid things in the water when they're under the influence of alcohol die of their alcohol use. The drowning is just incidental. So both directly and indirectly it contributes to fatalities of people who use it too much. This is Emil Jelinek. And he is the guy who in the 40s conducted Yale alcoholism studies. And these studies were so important and that we're still looking at them today. We're still considering them today. Jelinek was a biostatistician, and he followed recovering members in a longitudinal study. That means he conducted his interviews with them, and he tracked them over years. And of course, some of them relapsed and went off back doing their thing. But the ones that were recovering, he basically chronicled their recovery and collected data from them, and narrative data that they reported to him, what their drinking patterns were like, what happened, how their recovery was going, etc. This is called qualitative data, by the way. And he did have some quantitative data in there too, about how many he started with, how many he finished with, what happened to, how it divided out numerically. And that's quantitative studies. Qualitative is collecting data through narrative. So, drawing on qualitative data, he defined an alcoholic progression, and he discussed phases that people go through. No one gets up in the morning and says, I think I'll go be a drunk today, or be a wino, or be a junkie, or, any of those things. It's not how our lives take us to those places. They take us to those places surreptitiously. They don't let us know that we're going there. It takes us to those places without letting us know that we're going there. And people choose to drink for all kinds of reasons. But they don't choose to go down that particular drain of chemical dependency. That happens to them, but it's just like someone who's got a sweet tooth and eats a lot of pie doesn't plan on becoming diabetic. It can happen, though. Someone who smokes cigarettes doesn't plan on dying with lung cancer, but it happens, though. As he defined this process that takes you through stages to get to more and more severe symptomologies and more severe levels of your disorder, he also defined a species of drinkers. And so his contributions to the field are immense, and even though we don't use a lot of his language or his data in our clinical practices, is still a way of thinking about what happens to the drinker, what happens to a person who decides to drink for whatever reason. So, his phases: pre-alcoholic, People who are pre-alcoholic have a social motivation for use. They may use too much. They may drink too much from time to time. They may get in trouble with their drinking. They may have hangovers and get sick and feel bad. But they haven't lost control per se. They could still suck it up and quit if they want to. They can regulate their intake. And even though they're making bad choices, they can learn to make better ones. And as I said before, most people who start having problems with alcohol, they'll self-regulate. They'll cut back. They'll not use as much. They'll find different situations in which to use and how they use and what they use and all that kind of good stuff. So that's a pre-alcoholic phase, and you're not really even diagnosable when you're in that phase, although that doesn't mean that we can't work with someone who's in that phase. We can help them avoid the pitfalls of further deterioration and illness if they're not, chemically dependent. If they are, and they're just in this beginning phase, they're going to progress anyway, probably no matter much what we do, if we don't address their nascent disorders. Prodromal is a disease signaling phase, and that's when you start having things that are clearly abnormal going on with you. You might have a few abnormal things that are kind of iffy in your pre-alcoholic phase, but when you're in prodromal, now we're seeing stuff that really predict chemical dependency. Blackouts jump immediately to mind. Remember those retrograde amnesias? Alcoholic palimpsest is what Jelinek called them. And it's present inability to recall stuff that you did while you were drinking. You don't remember last night. You wake up somewhere and don't know how you got there. You wake up somewhere and don't know the person you're with. You wake up somewhere and you don't remember leaving your home. I've had those too. My last DWI, I woke up in jail in Humble. I've had 4, by the way. I'm not boasting. The cops could have got me almost any night for like 14 years, and I only got 4. So, actually I'm kind of lucky on that. But, moral of the story, I didn't remember getting arrested. I had to wait for somebody to come by and tell me what I was in jail for. It could have been anything from jaywalking to homicide. The last I remembered, I was at my mother's house in Conroe, and I woke up in the Humble jail. So I might point out to you that would scare the bejesus out of somebody who was just beginning drinking, or someone for whom the drug wasn't that important. But people who have the disorder that I have, they find a way to twist things around in their head where amnesia seems normal. Oh, everybody has that every once in a while. No, they don't. People who have a history of blackouts are people who are having an abnormal response to alcohol. And that if you're having abnormal responses to alcohol consistently, then you're in the prodromal stage of illness. Is signaling that you're having a disease. When your relief drinking becomes constant, when you're surreptitiously drinking, when you're lying about it, hiding how much you drink from people, stashing alcohol around the house or in the garage or under the car seat, etc., and so forth. Sneaking drinks before you go out to party because there might not be enough of it out there at the party. Now you're in the prodromal phase. Crucial, you have loss of control and living problems. Chronic is where the pervasive living problems pronounced loss of control, medical complications, getting sick, going to jail, having financial problems, all come into play. And it's in the chronic phase, by when the ego defense mechanisms and the alibi system's exhausted. And, people say to you, wow, dude, you drink a lot. You must be an alcoholic. And your response is, what's it to you? I'm not gonna explain, defend, or whatever. Wife says, okay, you're gonna stop drinking, and I'm gonna leave you, and this don't let the door hit you in the ass. Response. So a person, by the time they're done in this stage, can be very bankrupt. Now here's the kicker. Not everyone goes through all of these, and it takes years for some people to go through all of these. And it takes months for other people to go through it. There's no real timeline out there for how it's going to affect each individual. This is the Jelinek curve that he defined when he was doing his Yale studies. Now, you'll know up here that there's two things missing on this line. Here's the chronic phase where things get really bad that I was just talking about. Here's the crucial phase, which shows you things getting bad and worse going downhill. But up here is where your prodromal phase is located, and back here somewhere is where your pre-alcoholic phase is. The Betty Ford Foundation has played with this curve a little bit. And I looked around, I saw several of them that were put together this way. But if you are interested in looking, occasional relief drinking turns into constant relief drinking, increases in alcohol tolerance, you have to drink more to get to where you want to go, sneaking drinks, which is what surreptitious drinking is, onset of memory blackouts, increasing dependence on alcohol, feelings of guilt, and just da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, all the way down. When I first came into the field, and this was back in the mid-'80s, and one of my mentors told me, way up here, this is all you need, right there, onset of memory blackouts. If people are having blackouts, and this is happening on a fairly regular basis, if this has happened more than several times with them, that's all you need. You're dealing with an alcoholic. And at the time, the diagnosis was alcohol dependency, continuous usually. So when I came into the field too, I came in working with the DSM-3. So I was, and the DSM, the diagnostic criteria, has changed somewhat over time. You begin to, and a thing here that Jelinek noted, and this is, again, remember that he's taking this data from interviews with people. He's talking to people who have recovered in AA, and they're telling him things like there's memory blackouts increase, there's an inability to stop drinking when other people stop drinking, One of the earmarks for alcohol dependency throughout most of my career was people who would change social groups as their alcohol use got worse. They'd find a kind of a lower class drinking companion. And Spencer and I were laughing about it. We should have known we were in trouble when we couldn't find a lower class drinking companion to drink with. But other people would look for us so they could feel good. we start avoiding family and friends. We start being hard to get along with. We start being unpredictable mood-wise. We become miserable creatures, and we try to make everybody else around us miserable. And we ride down through that crucial phase into the chronic phase. And this is where you hit a spot that Father Martin referred to as the jumping off spot. And this is commonly referred to as a bottom. And you'll hear people say things like, well, you have to let people hit their bottom because they're not going to get better unless you do. I suggest that we raise the bottom going this way so that you don't have to go down so far and their curve doesn't have to be so deep. It could look more like this, you know. And you raise that bottom, you may save people 5, 10, 15 years that they have to spend getting here. And there's another thing that we have to keep in mind about bottoms. They kill you. When some people hit the bottom, that's it. They don't get up from it. The bottom is meeting the bottom is a fatal event. So you can jump off pretty much anywhere you've a mind to if you've got the motivation, the wherewithal, or maybe, just maybe, someone who knows a little bit about what they're doing and what they're talking about brings that bottom up to you and let you walk it across. When you're coming out of your descent into hell, you go through stages too. Getting better physically, having your mind clear up, becoming employable, having relationships with other people. One of the things, this is hell on a relationship. And I'm not talking about, boyfriend, girlfriend, or any of those combinations, but with parents, with friends, with employers, with anyone. This is a hell of a ride, and some of them won't go there. I can't remember who to contribute it to, but someone told me one time that if you want to get well, I'll go to hell with you. But if you want to continue doing what you're doing, you can go to hell by yourself. Which was pretty wise, or wise-ass, depending on how you look at it. Along that journey that Jelinek took with these recovering alcoholics back in the 30s and 40s, he began to define species, and these species refer to specific types of drinkings. And a species isn't like a different colored bird that you find on this side of the Grand Canyon as opposed to that side of the Grand Canyon. A species for Jelinek is really describing a type of drinking pattern and describing how this particular type of drinking affects individuals. Alpha drinkers, alpha alcoholics aren't really alcoholics, and this may not even really be a species, and he recognized that. This may be an alcoholic who's still in the pre-alcoholic phase up here, but he gave it a name. He had to start somewhere, and alpha is the first letter of the Greek alphabet, for AB, and is socially motivated, but it's somewhat problematic. And this is not just someone who drinks with impunity. It's somewhat problematic. They may have hangovers, get in trouble, say or do something stupid, lose control occasionally. Still somewhat problematic. Beta is a species that has no real physical withdrawal, no real loss of control, but they have secondary diseases associated with alcoholism, cirrhosis of the liver, Korsakoff psychosis, these types of things. And they may not be constant drinkers, may not be everyday drinkers, but these illnesses that are associated with alcoholism that appear in people who don't have particularly pathological drinking patterns may be related to diet or health care. In many cases, many instances, you'll find beta alcoholism among people who live in poverty, who don't eat well, who live in a food desert, on the reservation, places like that. Delta, you ever see that guy, or you ever been that guy, where people might say, oh, look at here, here's old Bobby, he's always got a damn beer in his hand. Every time I see Bobby, he's drinking. He's drinking something. He's got a drink in his hand. And I guess he drinks a lot, but you never see him drunk. And I would say, no, I beg to differ, mon frere. You never see him sober, because he maintains a fairly constant and minimal BAC, and he has to. Otherwise, he can't go a single day without experiencing withdrawal syndrome if he drops below it, if he stops drinking. So he's got to maintain that. And he doesn't lose control, and he doesn't get in a lot of trouble and all of that kind of stuff, and he looks like he's handling it well, but he's still got an alcohol use disorder. The gamma species that Jelinek defined was a stereotype. The loss of control, the health problems, the legal problems, the pervasive living problems, the guy who lives under the bridge or in the homeless shelter or in his car, that kind of stuff. This is there's some clear-cut problems with them, and the health problems are there, the legal problems are there. You can see it. And if they try to stop drinking, they will have withdrawal syndrome in most cases. And then there's the epsilon, and they're episodic drinkers, binge drinkers. And the way I remember that one is episodic episode, because epsilon, rather episode. Anyway, silly mnemonic, but it helped me. And two that were defined later. And this is reactive or secondary alcoholism that grows out of something else, a mental emotional diagnosis, for instance. I know, I hear you guys out there saying, no, wait a minute, Bushart, damn it, you just told us just a few minutes ago that alcoholism, alcohol dependency, substance use disorders, whatever you want to call it, is primary. It's a disease in itself. It's not symptomatic of some other underlying issue. Well, yes and no. People sometimes self-medicate. And when you have a condition, there's a mental condition, an emotional diagnosis of some type, you may discover that certain drugs out there will make you feel better. If you're schizophrenic, you may want to smoke weed. That happens with a lot of schizophrenics. It tends to make them feel better, their symptomologies and what have you. Bipolar people tend to drink and smoke cigarettes. It seems to alleviate their symptoms of their bipolarity, etc. But let's say you are, you're under some kind of stress. You go to Vietnam and you start smoking Thai stick, drinking Jim Beam, and you never smoked Thai stick or drank Jim Beam before you went there. And while you're there, that activity of using these substances alleviates the stress, and the long periods of boredom that are interspersed with periods of sheer freaking terror that constitute warfare, then maybe you'll have, that will be a relief for you to use those drugs. Why are you still doing it when you come back to the States and no one's throwing grenades or shooting at you? And chances are pretty good, even though you started reacting to some externalized event or some sort of symptoms that have emerged, if you get these fixed, if you're removed from the danger zone, if you get medicated to alleviate your stresses, etc., you'll still have the reactive or secondary alcoholism, because even though it grew out of something else, it's primary now. And it's a disease in itself, whether you take care of this or not. And this Jelinek brought that up. And George Valent, we'll talk about him later on, also has a good deal to say about that. Familial alcoholism is the type of alcoholism that is clearly inherited. It runs in families. Not just the tendency to have this disease, but the predictability of this disease when it catches hold of someone who has, first-degree blood relatives, moms, dads, and sisters and brothers who have alcoholism. It has an earlier onset. Usually people who have familial alcoholism start drinking when they're 10, 11, 12 years old. Around in there, and it has more virulent symptoms. The alcoholism progresses. The disease progress moves faster in these individuals than it does in people who don't have that family history. And finally, as far as disease is concerned, Jelinek notes in his disease concept of alcoholism, and it's a good book to read if you're interested in this sort of thing. A disease is simply anything the medical profession agrees to call a disease, and that's the absolute truth. If the doctors get together and say, look here, we've got this, this great set of symptoms, and look, there's a pattern to it, and you can, you can diagnose it, and you can track it, and you can see what the prognosis is going to be, and we've got treatments for it that we can introduce at any particular stage or phase of the development of the illness, and this thing responds to treatment. Well, heck, let's call it a disease. And so we do have behavioral diseases. People who watch too much porn can be diagnosed. People who can't control their shopping can be diagnosed. People who eat weird stuff can be diagnosed, like thumbtacks and, paint chips and this sort of thing. People who gamble can be diagnosed. So anything that the medical profession agrees to call a disease can be plugged into this. I'm not being light or making fun. Some of these conditions that I'm talking about are damn serious conditions, and they wreck people's lives, So, I think back to where I was, before I sobered up in 1982, a long time ago. You probably couldn't have sold me on this idea. I'm like, pshaw, that's nonsense. Drinkers have a disease. People who eat too many Big Macs have a disease. Nah. My thoughts have changed considerably over the years regarding this, and I hope that you will embrace the idea that the people that we're working with are not bad people trying to be good. They're ill people trying to get better. And because the way you think about them is going to inform the way that you treat them and how you value them and the types of things you do with them and all of that good stuff, right? I knew that. In conclusion, the disease concept of alcoholism is widely, though not universally, accepted. There are still people who disagree with this. The disease concept has destigmatized, to some degree, the occurrence of substance use disorder in individuals and families. It's not as shameful as it used to be. And when AA first got started, anonymity was a very big deal, and it was practically a big deal, because a lot of the people who were early members of AA were professional people, and their reputations were something that they had to consider. So they didn't necessarily tell people where they met or what they were doing or anything like that. Revisions to the DSM over time, and this is important, have allowed for the refinement of diagnostic criteria, but revisions to the DSM over time have also basically reflected a change in thinking with both society and with particular treatment providers. So something that was imaginable to do with people, or to think about doing with people, or to prescribe as a behavioral prescription or whatever with folks, seemed kind of brutal by today's standards, and we wouldn't think about doing that. The DSM-5's method of putting substance use disorders on a continuum, and that continuum stretches between no use and out of control use, and so everybody fits somewhere on that. Everyone fits somewhere on that continuum. That allows us to be able to inform people of substance use disorders and the risks and whatever of using particular substances. That allows us to intervene on them earlier on when they're doing things that may be harmful to them, but they're not at a place where we can diagnose them as being dependent. It allows us to intervene at the harmful use stage before it gets too far out of control. So that reflects a change in thinking, and it also reflects the fact that better diagnosis has led to better and more effective treatment for people who suffer from these conditions, and that's really important. And whoop-de-doo, just like that, we have got another one in the books. You've probably noticed that when I do these things, that sometimes I just hit the highlights. Sometimes I, depending on the subject matter, I'll spend more time on one of these lectures than I will on another. And it's not because there's not a lot, to be said about it. It's just that, you've got books to read, and you've got videos to watch and all of that, and there's no need putting a lot of extra stuff on you. So you're getting out of here in about an hour tonight. That's a real bargain for one of my lectures, wouldn't you say? Because usually they run about an hour and a half to two, sometimes longer than that, depending if I feel really long-winded that night. Again, I'm kind of used to interaction, and I've tried the virtual classroom during doing synchronous time where you're here in this with me, and it hadn't worked out very well. So this seems to be the best approach to getting stuff to you. I still miss the interaction. I still miss the questions. So if you have any, let me know. Sorry, I'm getting this to you later in the week. It's Wednesday of the week. You're supposed to have it right now, but I've had some health issues, and so but I'm better now. It's nothing, really heavy, but slowed me down a mite. Yeah, well, that said, I'll let you go and do what you're going to do. I'll talk to you later. Bye.